If you find yourself still struggling with the mental game and you feel like your mind is still getting in the way of you playing like you're capable of, I want to teach you what I was just teaching one of my one-on-one platinum players. And once you understand this, I think that it's going to completely change the way you look at mistakes, success, and honestly just change the way you operate in terms of your mental game on the ice. And so I've taught this to several different players, but I think that once you see this breakdown, it's going to change a lot. First concept that I want to break down is this idea of yin-yang. And basically, this is a Eastern concept, and the idea of yin-yang is basically that you have essentially a little bit of the opposite within whatever the thing is. If something is completely one way or completely the other, then it becomes rigid. You become a rigid thinker, and you don't have mental flexibility. And so this is a mistake that I see a lot of players make, and I wanted to break it down because once you realize this first principle, it changes a lot. And it's the idea of failure and success being either black or white, or in this case, green or red. So the idea I want you to think about is when you play, it's not about things being either a failure or a success. It's never like that. There is no such thing as just it's either this or that. Yes, I know we can say, okay, well, a game, you either win or you lose, or maybe you score or you don't. But a much better way to think of it is more in terms of hockey in the game itself when you're actually playing. When it comes to individual situations, is much more like this diagram here, which is you basically have it's either like the worst case scenario or the best or most ideal. And you want to start to look at your game from this perspective because most players live in this world that this is the only thing that matters. It's either perfect play, I did the right thing, I nailed it, or I essentially did like the worst, or it was either a success or a failure. But if you think like that, you're going to end up in this really frustrated place of, well, you realize like almost everything in hockey is like not perfect. Almost everything in hockey exists somewhere from like here to here, right? You're not going to be 100% ideal play all the time. And if you do expect that, then you're going to be in for a rude awakening. We think, oh, well, man, how do I deal with mistakes in hockey? Well, you reframe the way you see mistakes as it's just a component of the game. This is just how it works. And so instead of thinking of it as success or failure, you start to think of it as there's a more ideal and there's a less ideal or like a worst case. And those are extreme ends. And everything in hockey exists in this middle, in between. That's what you want to live in hockey and realize you're always living in. You're never going to make perfect plays all game. Every once in a while, you may make like just everything came together. Mechanics were beautiful. The decision was beautiful. Everything was just at the right time, right place. And you get that once in a while. But if you live for that, you're going to be very frustrated because rarely does that ever happen. And then if you think of everything as the worst, right, like you think of like, okay, well, almost all of hockey is just failure. Well, then you're like, oh, that's bad. But instead you realize it's just on this spectrum and you just have a worst and an ideal. What does it mean to make the most ideal play? That's where this piece comes in. So what you want to think about when it comes to like best and worst, or like what actually happens in terms of like how ideal was this play, well, you can think of these percentages as the amount of ideal it was. And of course, there is no such thing as perfect. But if you conceptually start to think of basically saying, let's imagine there was like something like an ideal play in any scenario, like on a 2-on-1 or whatever it was. And again, there's probably a whole bunch of ideal plays. But you basically have two pieces. You have the intent, or as Xander likes to call it at Conscious Hockey, like he calls it tactical, or you have execution, right? So if you think of execution, right, this is more the case of, if I can get this to highlight, right? Execution is the technical side of it. It's like the physical skills. It's the physical ability, right? Like how strong, fast, explosive were you, bouncy? Did you have those like physical tools and skills, or like athleticism is a lot of times what people call it, right? And then you have the mechanics. How efficiently did you do it? And that's really the body, right? That's the technical skill or the execution of the intent. And the key here is realizing the intent comes from the mind and is sent to the body. So you need to have clear tactical hockey IQ, the right intent, and then that comes from your brain, is sent to the body, and is executed with the physical abilities and the mechanical abilities. Mechanical abilities are technically stored in your mind because they're basically kind of motor patterns that are stored in your brain, but it's just easier to conceptualize them as almost like part of the body, right? People call it muscle memory. Muscle memory is not in your muscles, it's actually in your brain, but it's automatic, happens in your subconscious. What we want to think is that, okay, so we have intent, and then we have execution. Now, if our intent is really good, so hockey IQ, or let's say in this case, like a toe drag at the blue line, a lot of times like a toe drag at the blue line is pretty bad in terms of like pretty poor intent, because the risk to reward ratio, as I talk about right here, right, high risk for a okay reward, right? But the thing is that if you execute it at a high level, so high execution, well, then it can make up for bad intent or bad IQ. And you'll see a lot of players get away with this at different levels. They have good intent, but they have really bad execution, or they have really good execution and really bad intent. Basically, another way to say this is like having bad hockey IQ. So intent is like saying bad hockey IQ, but execution is like saying, but I have really good physical abilities, right? So if you have good physical abilities, it can make up for a lack of essentially like hockey IQ ability. And what ends up happening is it kind of balances out and it creates this kind of ratio. Now, these are probably weighted in some way. In a technical sense, it's just very difficult to scientifically back this up of how much execution outweighs intention, and realizing in different situations, your actual physical and mechanical skills and just ability to kind of like improvise probably becomes more important here. But at the end of the day, the key is realizing like these two things come together. The having good intention, it's like why you did the move, what move you selected, and at the timing, the right timing, right? That's the tactical piece. That goes into this kind of weighted, like how good was that play, right? And again, it exists on the spectrum of worst to ideal or worst to best. And then again, it's like a percentage. So this would be like it would exist here. So even if you got the play and you dangled a guy, well, it might still be a 75 because the intent wasn't very good. This is why I think coaches who have really like process-oriented thinking are much better than coaches who are very much about just like execution, because that means that a coach that thinks, oh, all that matters is you made the play, you executed. Well, the problem with that is it means you don't really think, well, what was the actual like risk reward? How ideal was the play? A player might make a play that was like 25%, like one of the worst intentions they could have had, like dangling in front of your own net, right? But you executed it, so the coach is like, whatever. And he just kind of weighs that out as valuable because maybe you don't have another player who's skilled enough and has the execution ability. But this is why optimal, great players who want to be elite at the top level, you want to have great physical ability, so you have the great technical, like physical and mechanical, and you want to have the right intent, super high hockey IQ. One thing that you might ask is mental ability, confidence. Like, what is that? Well, confidence is helping the signal or the trust and the belief and essentially like the confidence. It's the mental ability comes in to have the intent lead to execution. Where so many players get stopped up is that they might not actually have the right intent, and so then they end up not executing because they have both good intent and good skills, but their actual mental ability is horrendous and it gets in the way. So mental ability is in a lot of ways, it's really like a blocker. If you can get your mental ability to be at optimal, it's almost like you don't notice it. It's just, you're just confident. You just believe in yourself. And so that's what I want you to focus on if you're a player who's thinking like, well, what do I need to do? How do I become the player I want to be? And how does confidence and mental training come into it? Well, mental training comes into it because it is the thing that allows you to take your intent, your hockey IQ, your tactical ability, and transfer it into the physical ability or the execution. It takes intent and helps it become execution. That's what I do. That's what hockey, that's what mental ability is. That's what confidence is. That's what mental training really is whenever you think about it. And that is what allows this equation to work, because if intent and IQ, like again, if you're just somebody who's like, I know what plays to make, I have the right intent, I also know I have the tools, I'm really skilled, I'm really fast, strong, good conditioning, right? There's no limitations in either of these things. You're like, well, what's going on? Like, why am I not making plays? Well, it's because mental ability is lacking. There's something about confidence, belief, there's some fear getting in the way, and that's what's stopping you. And so that's why it's really important to realize that. And once you do, everything will change. It's also a lesson in what it means to just know what actual execution looks like and what it means to not just think in this rigid way of fail or success, but instead look at your game from a more ideal plays, less ideal plays, and understanding that hockey exists in this middle ground. So if you want to become a great player, you want to be a successful player, that's where you got to live. And through that, you got to make sure that you have the right intent, the right tactical knowledge, which means you need to work on your IQ. So master your IQ if you haven't. If you know what to do and you know the right play in all these scenarios, but you're still not making it, well, then you got to ask, well, maybe it's an execution issue, physical or mechanical issues that are getting in the way. That's the next place to solve, right? And again, that goes into the equation. And then if both these are higher, like I know what to do, I have the right ability, the execution's there. What do I do? Why is this not working? Well, mental ability might be blocking you. You want to think of mental ability essentially as either like it's like it's like a faucet, right? You can twist the faucet and open up the flow of water. That's really a good way to think of flow state, right? If you really break it down, if you think of basically flow state or mental ability, this is really what mental ability is. It's like a faucet. It's the ability to basically turn the kind of dial here, right? And imagine this is kind of like the dial that you can turn, right? And it either increases or it kind of decreases the flow of the amount of water that comes out, right? So maybe there's a little bit less or there's way more flow that comes out. Regardless, that's the key piece, is just realizing the mental game is about being able to, if you think of the water as your ability, right? So the water here kind of trying to flow out of the faucet is there. Mental ability can either open it up and make this massive flow of water be able to come, or it limits it. And so if you find yourself limited and you feel stuck and you're not playing the way you want, well, you have to start to build this, first of all, mental flexibility of understanding that it's not failure, it's not success, but it's more like less ideal, more ideal plays. You need to make sure that you set the right intention, right tactics. You have the right execution, technical. Those go into actually making kind of the success equation. And if both of these things are high and you know what to do and you're just not executing it, and even though you have the tools to execute it, right? So it's both of those are there, you know, and this is what a practice player is. They have high execution percentage. They have great intention. They know what they want to do. Their IQ is high. Well, then that's where you need the mental ability. Because again, you have the physical tools, you have the kind of hockey IQ decision-making tools, is you need to open up the flow and make sure that you've removed the mental blocks, stopped the fear, removed all those pieces, and you've actually built these different skills of mental flexibility. Because when you build all these mental skills, eventually what happens is that you open up your ability to get into flow and trust yourself and play your game. So I hope this helps, and I hope this helps you narrow down what you need to work on, because you're either going to need to work on your hockey IQ and intent, your execution and technical skills, or your mental ability. It's one of these three things. That's it. And so just figure out what it is that's limited right now, and that will set you up for endless success. I hope this helped. Talk to you soon.